First of all, thank you for having me. This is one of my favorite places to come. I don't always get down. I think I spoke here maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Occasionally I get down in this area. I was a graduate student, had some plots out at Plymouth and actually somewhere in the Blacklands back in the 80s. Tells you how long ago I was. I'm not, but somebody asked me, he said, "What, are you gonna stay as long as Dunphy?" I said, no way, I ain't staying 40 or 50 years, but been here 20 some at Virginia Tech and Nebraska before that. Second of all, you've got an excellent soybean specialist, and I appreciate what she is doing. This is probably one of the most ambitious experiments I've ever seen, because in some locations, if I'm correct, you got 8 planting dates times 7 maturity groups. That's 56 treatments. Then you're doing seeding rates within that, 5 seeding rates. So we're looking at around 250 treatments, all interacting together. And that's what we really need to understand, is how these things interact, because that's the ultimate goal, I think, Tristan, out of this, because I have a feeling that the planting date and the maturity group is going to affect plant population and how we plant these things. So this is an excellent. And the other thing, like I say, I've got 20 years of work in Virginia. When I first came there, I started working with the early soybean production system. We were, in that case, we were planting group 3s in May. I wasn't going as early as 2, but 3s for us would be an early maturing variety. Let me back up. Keep in mind that we are almost a full maturity group earlier than you are. So a group 5 for us would be equivalent to a 6, because of the photoperiod, we have longer days than you do in the summer. Therefore, the 5 is going to flower about the same day a 6 is going to flower in North Carolina. Now, I'm located in Suffolk, Southeast Virginia, so you can say that'll be, you know, a 6 here would, well, 5.5 would flower about the same day as a 6. So it's a confusing thing with soybean because of this photoperiod issue we have, but keep that in mind. So have I done this work? I've not done anything this ambitious. I've done planting date by maturity group study. I got some going on in Virginia right now. We're doing an April, May, and June planting date. And then we're looking at relative maturities ranging from 3s through early 6s. And I call relative maturity because I see differences in an early and late 4 and early and late 5. So we're looking at a whole range. But I'm not doing as much as they are. We do see what you see, early flowering. When we go with the group 5 or 6 planted in April, I'm talking about mid-April, maybe late April. We haven't gone into March yet. We're still a little cool in Virginia. We can get a late frost that can really devastate you up there. So we're talking about April. I do see that. But with that said, we're not getting the results that we're supposed to get. Our early maturity groups planted in April aren't doing as well as our later maturity groups planted in April. But I think I know the reason is, and you mentioned it's environmentally. So you see different things, different years, different environments going to result in cause different results. Theoretically, Dr. Van mentioned, what we're trying to do is not necessarily, well, you said flower by the longest day of the year. But what we're really talking about is forming seed and pod when there's more sunlight, okay? Because if we got more sunlight, what's going to happen? What's going to happen if we got more sunlight to yield, theoretically? Should have more yield, because that's what's making our yield, the sunlight. I always say there's 3 main limiting resources in any plant life. One is sunlight. One is sun. The clouds are covering the sky like they did last year, yields might be down a little bit. Or if we're not producing enough leaf area, yields might be down. We've got to capture that sunlight. What's number 2 and probably more important? Moisture, water. Do you have that issue here? Too little water or too much? Both. Yeah, I know. That's what we run into here. But in general, you're looking at high organic matter soils. Water's less of an issue here than it is in most of North Carolina, most of Virginia, where we're looking at droughty, sandy soils or the droughty, clay, Piedmont soils. Saying we have in Virginia, we're 10 days from the last rain to a drought. And that's generally true in most areas. You may not be quite in that situation. So you got water, light, nutrients is the other thing. We're trying to keep the nutrients, follow our soil test. We should be able to manage those nutrients. If you can eliminate water, say you're under irrigation or you're on a good soil, then I would say the early soybean production system will work better. I may be wrong, but that's where I think it's going to work better. Because the other thing is, do you really want to be forming seed? Where's the group 4? And I'll just use the group 4 here because I think what we're talking about is 4s are still early. I mean, really you're in a group 5, group 6 growing area as far as tradition, historical area, but 4s are really early. But this is probably the most critical stage of the soybean plant's life. In many parts of North Carolina and Virginia, I don't want to be producing seed this time of year. Why do I say that? Why do I say that? Why don't I want to be producing seed this time of year? Most of North Carolina, most of Virginia. I'm not talking about right here. What? Hurricanes? No, I might want to be producing seed this time of year if I'm watching for hurricanes so I can get them out early. It can be hot and dry. That's the main issue. Do I really want to be producing seed at the hottest and driest time of the year? If we can eliminate moisture, which I think we have here, then we got one thing out of the way. I still say heat's one of our biggest issues with soybeans. Soybean does not like it once it gets above 90 degrees. Not investigated that in detail or with a physiologist, but my experience is where our early soybean production system works better is in those low stress environments. If I'm in a stressful environment, then I don't want to be producing seed this time of year, regardless of how much sunlight I have, because water's a much, much bigger issue than sunlight. So that's my comments on the system. We are actually, when we talk about maturity groups now, I talk about probabilities of making them successful. I've taken 10 years of variety test data, and I've seen that in general in Virginia we're a group 4 and 5 state. That'd be like a 5 and 6 state for North Carolina. We are a group 4 and 5 state. But in those drier, more droughty areas, 80% of the time, those group 5s will always make your best yield. However, in those same areas, about 30 to 40% of the time, I can use a group 4, be similar to a 3 for you, and make greater yields than I can make with a 5. There's much higher risk, but there's much greater benefit. So what I'm telling our growers, especially in these droughty areas, I say, don't shy away from the 4s. That'd be like a 3 to you. Don't shy away from the 4s. This is being southern Virginia on a droughty soil, but only plant those on your best soils. Plant those early, and then take your later maturing varieties, plant those later, push that critical time to later in the year when it's less hot and dry. But the other odd thing about Virginia is we don't see the early, now yeah, in our farthest northeastern location in Virginia, group 3s and early 4s do better, but I can see the mountains from there. I think it'd be the same way here. You got a short growing season. But the other odd thing we have, our maturity group pattern doesn't follow latitude. What we would normally think is you plant the early maturity groups farther north, later maturity groups farther east. What we're actually seeing is that a late 4 works really well in Suffolk, which is southeast Virginia on a good soil. And it also works very well on our eastern shore. I don't know how many of you have ever been to our eastern shore? It's our 2 biggest agricultural counties in the state, at least crop-wise. A lot of vegetables up there and so forth. It's also our biggest corn and soybean and wheat counties. That's a sandy soil, so it's not that great of a soil. We have some clay below it, but longest growing season of the year. You would think that's where the group 5s, we can grow 6s there that would do well. But what's growing well there, our best, is our early 4s. Why is that? Water's part of it, but the other thing is we got less heat. That's our coolest part of the state in the summertime. What's it like here? I mean, is this area cooler than when you move inland? Our hottest part of the state is central part during the summer, And I think that heat is hurting us more than anything else. Again, it's about productivity. Seeding rate, one thing I found, at least with group 3s, we may have to go a little higher seeding rate, because if you go real early, you're not getting a lot of growth, right? What I can't explain here, you planted this early May, early April. This is a group 3. You got a group 3 planted late April that looks much better.
Yeah, our late April in the same trial looks better, so I don't know if it was an environmental. It took these beans longer to get out of the ground.
Okay.
Than the April 12th planting.
So you got a little stress early on with these early planting, therefore you've got to use a fungicide almost. If it's going to take 3 or 4 weeks, you better protect it. The longer the beans in the ground, the more disease you're going to have. But that's one thing I noticed about this, or can we go too early with the variety? And that's why this test is going to yield some really good information. But right now it looks like that late April planting is the best. So I've seen this, we got to use higher seeding rates, but maybe we don't if we go a little later planting. All right, I'm done. I'm the pinch hitter here. And let's congratulate Rachel. You just had a great 10-pound baby boy, what, a month ago?
9 pounds, yeah.
1 month ago, and she's here today. So congratulate Rachel. I was the pinch hitter, but I wasn't even supposed to talk today. So any questions, comments? I don't know how much time we have today.
You got about 20 minutes left.
Okay, we can interact, walk plots.
Yeah,
do you want to walk some plots?
Folks, 'cause these are some of our best plots in the state from a height differential to see kind of how these growth habits have played out. So if we walk across the plot,
Rachel, let me clip this on you. Here, you do it.
all right. Here's our maturity group 2 planted April 12th. Probably ready for harvest in about a week and a half. We started harvesting these in Sampson County yesterday. For the growers here, what are some concerns you have with these plots right here? Getting them in the combine, yeah, the ones we had yesterday were very short, probably 8 inches tall. Are you ready to harvest soybeans next week?
One thing you'll see is the height to the first node is going to be very short when you plant these things early. That's because it's just common, so you'll miss a little bit of that bottom when you're combining. That's a good point that you're going to see, because that is common. You're going to miss those bottom pods.
I'm real concerned with the quality of you know.
We need to talk about
So the comment was concerns with the quality, and that's going to be one of the bigger disadvantages of these earlier maturing varieties that are maturing over the next month or so, even during hurricane season, because they're very susceptible to degradation in quality. I've had plenty of growers that are successfully producing early maturing varieties tell me that the yield benefits that they get outweigh the quality declines when we talk about the quality issues, but it's absolutely something that you can see.
With the quality issue, and I meant to mention that is, in my opinion, the #1 risk that you're going to take. We've had some very successful growers in the northern part of our state growing group 2s planted in April. They won the yield contest several times. They're bumping 100 bushel. Last year, the guy called me, said, "These beans look great. I was high yield. I can't sell a one of them." And he showed me a picture. The quality went to nothing. Now, last fall was a bad fall, but that is a risk you take. Phomopsis seed decay is going to grow, and the longer you wait to harvest, the more it's going to affect you. And that seed decay is going to almost exponentially increase on you. If there's leaves on the plant and the seed are ready to foliate the crop, get in there and harvest it. And the other question is, that Rachel asked, can you afford to harvest when you're harvesting corn?
So those are mature. Any comments about this? Anybody out here have experience with a maturity group 2? I think Andrea told me last year someone grew a 2.5 out here. But that's what we're seeing, and what we saw in Sampson County yesterday, the plants were very short, the maturity group 2, the yield potential was very low. So I think, to his point, can you plant too early? Yes. It's just, if you're going to be planting in this early situation, what maturity group should you be using? As we move across, so this maturity group 4, which is 49x6, as grow looks really good. It looks tall, you know, as tall as some of our determinate varieties. Surprised by the growth potential in this, but it looks comparable to some of those, the height in some of those varieties in the maturity group 3 over there. But I would have expected these to be slightly shorter than some of these determinate varieties. So this is our maturity group 7. We are anticipating that this is too early to plant that late of a variety, but we'll see what the yield results are. We've got a maturity group 5. This is our maturity group 3. So you can see with these earlier maturing varieties, the 2s and 3s, they started flowering, their vegetative growth cut out early, so they're not as tall, but their pod set is very respectable. So we'll have to see what kind of yield increases we get here. If you're wondering about the seeding rates, those move across the back. So if you want to walk through there, I don't think at a site like this where you've got a lot of vegetative growth, you can visually see a lot of differences amongst these seeding rates, but you're welcome to walk across the back.
Are you measuring leaf area or anything like that?
No, so this first year when we're getting going, the data we've been collecting is soil moisture and soil temperature at planting, the date of beginning flowering. We'll take grain yield, and then we'll take a subsample of each plot and analyze it for quality. But in subsequent years, we do have the Chronos systems to access some other weather data and photosynthetically active radiation, but that's all we're capturing in year 1. As you mentioned, this is a big undertaking for our team, so we're just trying to see what's feasible from a data collection standpoint. And we may add a couple parameters next year, but I'm sure my team is going to kill me just hearing that mentioned.
One thing that we talked about was row width versus all these different maturities and planting dates and populations.
So the question was regarding row width. So the reason we didn't investigate row width in this particular study is that it's already very big, so it's just not something we could tackle here. But last year, the county extension agents in this area had some agent-led research on the maturity group 3 and 4 soybeans, where they compared 15 versus 30-inch row spacing. And if you averaged across the state in those maturity groups 3 and 4 planted early, the 15-inch rows provided about a 7 bushel per acre yield advantage. But I know the landscape's more complex out here, where some folks are planting onto beds, or they need the wider row spacing from a drainage perspective. So I know it's not standard across the state, but those are the results that we were seeing, was that often the 15-inch row spacing out yielded the 30s, but not always. I don't know if you have any comments. I know where these indeterminate earlier maturing varieties are often produced, they're on a wider row spacing than 15s.
We've looked at different maturity groups and row spacing and how they interact, and there's no interaction. It's just 15s yield more than the 30s, I would say 75% of the time. There will be a year that the 30s out yield the 15s for some strange reason. But I can't see it, but it just makes sense. You capture that light early. We're talking about light here anyway, capturing the light. We got to capture that as early as we can and get it rolling. I don't like a drill. It's too spotty. We're either planting too many seed or too little, all in the same area. And you get more lodging. It's not the way to get the next step higher yield. It's a drill. So we've moved away from drills in Virginia, gone to the air seed or 15-inch meter planters. Never had anybody that disliked one. Hadn't met anybody yet that moved from a drill to the air seeder that disliked it. I don't know, 15 versus 20. I have not researched that. 20 might be that sweet spot. I know people like to experiment with 20-inch corn and then go with one planter, but I've not really researched that. I would think it would do fine. I guess theoretically it wouldn't do as good as 15. I have shown differences between 7.5 and 15 inches. 7.5 yielded better if I meter to seed. Only when I meter to seed. Most of the time 15, it yield the same as the drill, but I've seen the 15, a third of the time out yield the 7.5 drill. I just don't like drill. For looking for maximum yield. It's not uniform. That we've ignored it too long. That spacing within the rows is very important, in my opinion.
soybean.
And it's probably difficult to see here, but these are our four 15-inch rows, and these were drilled with a cone planter that Ryan Heiniger in the OBT program generously let us use. But next year we'll have another vacuum planter, so we'll be able to hopefully see improved yields even beyond what we're seeing this year. So you can look at the different maturity groups, but then we move into this next planting date, which was the April 30th planting date. I think one of the biggest surprises we saw, which Dr. Holzhauser already mentioned, is that our maturity groups 2 and 3 planted at the end of April look better than what we saw planted at the beginning of April. You would have anticipated at the beginning of April those earlier maturing varieties would have had more time to grow, so it was likely an environmental weather situation that we got going on, but clearly very excessive vegetative growth in some of these later maturing varieties. So that's kind of the plot layout here. Next year at the Blacklands Tour, depending on the location, we hope to have a wider range of planting dates.
Is the group 2 the same variety?
Yes, the group 2 is the same variety. I should thank Zach Webb and Bayer Crop Science for donating all the varieties here. I said I want a maturity group 2 through late 7 as genetically similar as possible, because we're trying to, just compare maturity groups, but that's very difficult in terms of disease resistance. So these are all Extend varieties and the same varieties across the trial. Other questions?